Okay, well, I want to start. So this is a very special episode of the Arc Party. Usually my format is I read a book that's coming out, I talk to the author about the book, and then we encourage you to go get it ahead of time. That format's out the window this time because what we decided to do as huge fans of Stephen Graham Jones is in the lead up to The Angel of Indian Lake, we are doing deep dive episodes of all three books. So this is the deep dive episode for My Heart is a Chainsaw. And I'm going to say right up front, this is a conversation for people who have read the book. Like, we are not going to hold back what we talk about. We're not going to worry about spoilers. We're going to dig into it. We're going to dive deep into it and probably nerd out about Jones stuff too a little bit. But that's the format of this episode. I'm very excited. I haven't done a deep dive before. I asked two very special people to be guests to do this deep dive with me. And we're just going to introduce ourselves really quick. You know that I'm Rob. I'm the host of the Arc Party. And I got started reading Stephen Graham Jones because I used to host a podcast called Booked. And at the beginning of starting that podcast, we were really tied into a group of people that were connected to a website called The Velvet. And The Velvet was a website supporting three authors, Will Christopher Bear, Craig Clevenger, and Stephen Graham Jones. So I was already tight with a bunch of people who were fans of Stephen Graham Jones. And basically the first time he had a new book come out, when my podcast was going, we reviewed it. I realized this dude's a genius. And that was all she wrote. I think the first book that we reviewed was Zombie Bake Off. So that's, I want to say 2012. And there's so much genius in that book. That's one of those books where like people are like, where should I start? And selfishly, I'm like, that's where I started. And look where I am now. So I don't see why anybody else should do anything different. So Zombie Bake Off is fantastic, and I think everybody should read it. But since then, I've read, I think, everything he's released since that point, and I've gone back and read earlier stuff too. So that's kind of like the launch point of my fandom. I'm going to ask each of my guests to quickly introduce themselves and kind of talk about their origin of reading Stephen before we get into the book. So let's start with Greg.
Hey, everyone. I'm Greg Greene. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, longtime Nashville resident. And I'm a huge fan of Stephen Graham Jones and a number of other horror authors. Of course, Jones is known probably best for his horror work. It's certainly not limited to that genre or to genre fiction in particular. But I'd say probably this has been about 2018 or so. I was interested in the contemporary horror fiction scene, and so I saw an audiobook called "The Best of the Best Horror of the Year," of course, from Ellen Datlow, the master anthologist and editor, who's brought more horror to more readers than probably anyone alive. And this has a story called Chapter 6 by Stephen Graham Jones. It's probably the first time I really read one of his stories. And then after that, I was taking a long drive through Wyoming this has been 2020 with my son, Aussie, and I brought along this book called The Only Good Indians, which I was hearing a lot about. And I was familiar with Stephen's work a little bit at that point. That was really the first full book of his that I read. Thoroughly enjoyed driving across the whole state of Wyoming. We drove like 1,800 miles in about 6 days, and it was really interesting to about day 5 or so, we were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And if you've ever been to Jackson Hole, there is a park downtown, and it has 4 enormous columns full of elk antlers. And so I got a picture of the Only Good Indians book on one of those antler columns, dried bone white antlers, and then kind of did some sort of a kind of spiral back and made it look kind of like, like the title credits for Lost or something. And then put that out on Twitter, and Stephen saw it and just kind of remarked favorably toward that. So that was really kind of how I first started to follow Stephen's work and also get to know him. Really was over Twitter. But now I'm a completely rabid, crazy Stephen Graham Jones fan. I've got all of his books. I've read about half of them. It's taken some time to get through, but I'm also really into tracking down the individual stories. He's got scores, at least scores, maybe hundreds of short stories that are not in any collection that he's been publishing since 94, 95. So kind of getting all of that, doing 100% read of all his fiction is one of my bucket list goals. And I'm on the way, but there's a lot to get through.
And if I remember correctly, and Jesse can back me up on this, I believe the way that you came onto my radar originally was I saw on Twitter one day, I'm like, there's this guy who's asking about Stephen Graham Jones stuff. And the way that I saw it was that Jones had replied and said, "Oh, Jesse probably knows more than anybody else."
Yeah.
And then me and Jesse were like, "Oh, there's this dude who's looking for information." And like, so I think we both replied. And yeah, like that. I believe that was you.
Certainly, we had that interaction. He said probably Jesse has read more of my stuff than just about anybody, and that's how I came to know who Jesse was.
Yeah, and so that was the first time like you came onto my radar,
Yeah.
and then I kind of like forgot about it, but then you just kept your presence as a fan of Stephen grew and grew to the point where I was like, oh, he's the Stephen fan. So yeah, that's my perception of you. Like it started out with this like very polite curiosity, and then it just, it grew.
Went full blown obsessive. Yep. That's how I roll. Well, it's an honor to be thought of as someone who is a huge fan of Stephen's work. And I certainly want to help proliferate it because people need to read these stories. It will help people be better people if they read his stories, including some of his really, really dark horror stories. So yeah, I love to advocate for artists whose work moves me, and no one has more than Stephen's.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of those things where it's like there are authors that I'm more quick to respond when someone's like, "Hey, what about?" And there was a teacher that had said like, "Hey, what can I have my students read of Stephen Graham Jones?" At one point, and I dove on that one, and I was like, "What about?" So yeah, those questions I'm like pretty quick to answer, but probably looping in Jesse too because he knows way more than me, and that's a great way to segue to Jesse. First of all, you can introduce yourself and just say like, how did you get started reading Stephen's stuff and becoming a fan of his work?
I'm Jesse Lawrence. And it's weird, the trajectory or the beginning or whatever, the discovery. I remember chatting online with Billy J. Stratton, who is also fantastic author himself, writes a lot of great stuff. Big fan of Stephen, knows Stephen as well. Made that book happen, absolutely, which is great. And him and I have a similar path. And I'm kind of blanking on what feel like both of us were blanking on what our firsts were, but it wasn't right with Fast Red Road. It wasn't right directly at the beginning. So Rob, you mentioned The Velvet, which I was a part of. And it's weird because at that time they were Dennis Widmeyer was sending arcs of Will Christopher Baer's Hell's Half Acre to the first 5 people who signed up on The Velvet.
Oh, cool.
And I got one of those.
Wow.
So I knew Will Christopher Baer's stuff from the beginning. It was one of those really just random things where I happened upon Kiss Me Judas in a bookstore, and it was like, holy shit, So I knew that stuff, and I knew Craig Clevenger because the connection all there when that was all first coming out. But with Stephen Graham Jones, Drew McCoy, who is also a member of The Velvet and also a fantastic writer himself, he's the one who introduced me to Stephen Graham Jones through email and private messaging and whatnot. But he was also talking about him on the message board. And I believe Drew McCoy, and I feel so bad that I'm remembering the other name, possibly 2, if there were 2 other people involved. But Drew McCoy was one of the people who created Stephen's first website. It was called Blue Monkey Land.
Oh, wow.
So I was on that, and they were weekly posting stories, short stories. And that was my first exposure to Meat Tree, which is still to this day one of my favorites of his short story stories that he's got out there. So yeah, Drew McCoy was the one who kind of hipped me to Stephen Graham Jones, which kind of makes me think. I believe it was All the Beautiful Sinners was the first one I read, and then after that I read Bird Is Gone, and then Fast Red Road, and then from that moment on I was along the path with it for everything that came thereafter. And man, what a ride! Seriously,
what a ride! What a ride! Yeah,
Seriously.
what a ride!
and it's funny that it's not that you have to be a horror fan to enjoy his stuff, or a science fiction fan, or kind of a crime thriller fan. You just become. It doesn't matter what genre he's writing in. You quickly become a Stephen Graham Jones fan. He is his own genre. I mean, every author really ultimately is, but Stephen really. I mean, you can find so many of the same concerns in his stories across multiple genres. There's I don't know, a grittiness and an authenticity to his writing that is just unlike any. It's a signature style. So yeah.
Well,
Absolutely, and I think Stephen is the like you said, everyone writes in their own genre, but I feel like Stephen is completely cemented in that same mold as Lansdale, where he's
Yes.
always said, "I write the Joe R. Lansdale genre." I
Yeah.
think Stephen writes the Stephen Graham Jones genre.
Stephen told me about being and I asked him about his relationship with Joe Lansdale as a friend and really as a mentor. And Stephen was saying, yeah, like he remembered seeing Joe Lansdale in a panel many years ago, and someone said, "Mr. Lansdale, what genre do you write? What genre do you write in?" And he said, I write in the Joe R. Lansdale genre. Next question, move on. And Stephen said immediately, like, that's what I want to do. I want to write. It doesn't matter what genre or what the market demands are, whatever. He wants to write the stories that interest him, and he's done it. And if he's writing, you have literary fiction and then you got genre fiction. When it doesn't matter if he's writing genre, it's literary. He's really just kind of breaks down those, I guess, false dichotomies.
Yeah. And just like on the level of a person, because like obviously there's his writing, but then there's him as a person. And I think about, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but we were having tacos with him one day in where were we? Was that in Minnesota or was that where were we? That had to be Minnesota, Jesse.
I don't recall tacos in Minnesota. I remember going to that steakhouse. Or it wasn't a steakhouse, but it was.
Oh no, yeah.
It was the meat and whiskey.
No, I'm talking
restaurant.
about a different time. Maybe it was Seattle. We were somewhere and we had lunch with him, and I won't tell the whole story, but he was just telling this totally innocent story about like having too many t-shirts and trying to make room in his closet. And it was just like the most endearing, like dumbass story. But I was like, I love this guy. I could listen to this guy talk about anything all day. But one thing that I've always liked about him as a person, and then been lucky enough to interview him many times, is it is so obvious, and even in his writing, it's so obvious that he is a fan of the stuff. Like he, like in the acknowledgement of this book, so thankful for the movies that he was watching as a kid, and that's like where this comes from. You can tell that like he is enthusiastic about the genre of horror. He's enthusiastic about good writing, and like that's the kind of person that I want to support, really. So
Yeah.
On a personal level, aside from being a fucking brilliant writer, he's a very good person. So
he's also, I feel like he's probably about 10 different people squeezed into a single person's lifetime, because the sheer amount, every time I listen to him on an interview, on a podcast, I hear some other incident of him surviving a wild animal attack, or he told one on the Kingcast the other day about how he got poisoned by a rattlesnake after the snake was dead, and it didn't even touch him, and he still got poisoned by it. It's unbelievable, the sheer number of anecdotes the man has. I think he's probably multiple people squeezed into one lifetime.
Well, even his like writer origin story takes place in a hospital, I think so.
Yeah, that's right. It does.
All right, before we get into the book, we just need to, like, when we have this kind of gathering, we need to geek out a little bit. And I'll acknowledge, like, you guys have worked hard over the years to, like, gather fun things and trophies and, like, moments and experiences. And so, like, when else are we gonna have an opportunity to talk about this shit all in one place? So one thing I'll note about Jesse is that Jesse is beyond. Jesse's the kind of guy who will, like, pre-order and then forget that he already pre-ordered and that he already pre-ordered. And so, like,
It's
suddenly
true.
he'll have 3 copies of stuff. That's how I have a copy of, I think that's States of Grace over there, is because Jesse had so many copies. He could actually, probably half of my collection of Stephen Graham Jones books, if not more, is stuff where Jesse's like, I saw a picture of your shelf, you're missing stuff. And he just sent me a box of things. So he's been a avid collector of many authors over the years, and I've benefited from that greatly. So, like, yeah, what kind of prizes? What are our prizes? What are our things that we're proud to have from Stephen?
I mean, Greg's got what has to be the rarest item related to Stephen Graham Jones. Greg, you want to bust that out onto the camera?
Is this the item you're talking about right here?
It is, and your hunting that down is massively impressive. I never thought I would even see a picture of it in a person's hands. Like,
Yeah.
that is incredible.
For our audio listeners,
yes. This is a journal called Mind Purge, and it was published, I believe, out of or in association with the University of North Texas in, like, winter 94, 95, I believe it was. And this contains Stephen's very first published story. It's called The Parrot Man, published under the name Stephen Jones. I was aware of this, had actually seen a copy of this before, and I really thought, man, if I could ever have my own copy of this for my collection, wouldn't that be a thrill? So I found the fiction editor of this journal and looked up her name on Twitter, and sure enough, there's someone kind of matching that name. Oh, who's in North Texas? And I'm like, hey, DM'd her. Hey, like, is it any chance, were you the editor of Mind Purge? And I would love to have a copy of this and don't know where I'd get it. And she's like, yeah. Wow. It's so great to know people are still kind of looking for this journal. And I have one spare copy. I'm like, I will pay for it. No, I'll give it to you. Can I pay postage? No, I'll pay postage. And then she DM'd me back a few minutes later saying, wait a second, Stephen Jones. Is that Stephen Graham Jones? And I said, he was planning, he thought he was just going to be a farmer growing up in Midland, Texas. And you published his first story and maybe sent him on a path toward, being a world famous writer. And she was so delighted to know that she had kind of made some difference in that. Anyway, she sent me this, and I will say about the story, The Parrot Man, he came out of the corner swinging. It's a strong story. It's a really strong story. I'm just completely delighted to have this. And so, yeah, that's Mind Purge, containing the story The Parrot Man.
That's fantastic. That is really cool.
Love it.
I was showing off one of my favorite pieces of my collection. I don't consider my collection to be particularly special in any way, but by an absolute fluke of luck, I have one of the rarest Stephen Graham Jones publications that's signed and numbered, and it is the Elvis Room, published by This Is Horror, and I happen to have copy number 1 of 100.
Only 100 copies in existence, and people who want to complete their Stephen Graham Jones collections, then that is one of the key pieces, and it is really, really hard to find.
Yeah. So apologies for the thumbs up. That's an Apple thing. I got it. I ordered it when it was released because I really enjoyed the This Is Horror chapbook series that they put out. Like, they put out Nathan Ballingood's The Visible Filth before it was right. Wounds. There was some really good stuff. Ray Cluley's Water for Drowning was really good. Josh Mellerman, A House at the Bottom of a Lake.
Wow.
Like, that was originally a This Is Horror one. So they did awesome stuff, and I just really liked them, and I wanted to support them. So I ordered that. Got number 1. It didn't
Wow.
ask for it. Didn't do anything. It didn't slip anybody like a 5 pound note or anything. It just that's what showed up. So
No
and I
Finsky there.
didn't even
Nice.
realize it until years later. I was like just looking through my stuff one day and I was like, is that number one?
Wow.
So yeah, very cool. Very excited about that.
So cool. So cool. Jesse, how about you? What a really cool piece in your collection?
Man, I wish I had the props to throw up on camera here. I've got so much stuff still just in boxes because I feel like I'm forever moving constantly, doing the apartment shuffle or whatever, but I feel like I have it's not a complete collection, but it's near complete. Um, I have most of what has been published in one form or another. So, including a lot of foreign editions, which, obviously I can't read those like themselves, those copies, but, I like collecting books. I've always liked collecting books. And a lot of those foreign editions, too, have really awesome artwork for the covers.
Yeah.
The Carfax, La Biblioteca del Carfax. I think I'm probably butchering the name, but it's a publisher in Spain that does the Spanish language editions. And oh man, the covers are beautiful. Love them.
Those are great. They have amazing covers, and the German Cemetery Dance, limited editions that have been coming out. Awesome artwork all around too. So yeah, I just like collecting books, and I like the art and all the effort that goes into those books. It's kind of like I've got a handful of film posters that are foreign too, just because they just look so cool. I'm like, I just like this piece of art for what it is. So, throw that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to imagine, Jesse, that a lot of your like secret treasures aren't even on the bookshelf. They might be in your email inbox. I have to imagine that like your real treasure is like stuff that you've been sent as like early versions of stuff over the years.
I mean, I'm just forever grateful and honored and lucky and anything else relative you could say work like language wise to have gotten to read the things I've gotten to read from Stephen. I'm like, I don't even know what to say. Like I'm just, like forever mind blown, honored and grateful and whatnot. I mean, I've gotten to read some really, really cool stuff. And even if they never get published, and sometimes there's things, where, he'll even say, yeah, I was doing this and it wasn't working, so I just moved on. It's like, even those stories that aren't working, I find so many amazing things within them. It's even beyond the thought that even a really bad horror movie has a cool thing in it. Like, you might be watching the worst movie in the world, but it's got a werewolf in it, and that's really, really cool. So yeah, even the things that just kind of don't pan out, there's gold in there for sure. And yeah,
I think this is Jesse's way of saying, without saying, that he's read American Neanderthal.
I have read that one. I have.
Yeah, see, that's the treasure. That's the treasure. But you've had a long time relationship with Steven where he's trusted you to be an early reader, and like he trusts your input and stuff like that. So that's really cool. All right, I'm going to pivot us in the direction of the book. So and an illustration of I think Steven and your relationship is that he put you in the acknowledgements for My Heart is a Chainsaw. When he was talking about how he'd written the book and torn it apart, rewritten it, torn it apart, rewritten it. And he was thanking people who were readers and for their advice and their input. And he thanks you by name. And he says that you've probably read several versions of the book before it became what it was. So that's fantastic. I've always loved the relationship that you and Steven have, because it's obvious that there's a lot of I call you Steven's little brother, because that's totally the kind of relationship that I see when I look at you guys. Greg, where you come into specifically being tied into this book or this series is written all over your chest, buddy.
It
So
is. It is, and it's been such a blast to produce and distribute the Jay Daniels is my final girl T-shirts, because people are they wear them to live events. Stephen will wear them at public events, and I just, the thought of helping to enrich the reading experience just a little bit, and helping people feel like a little more connected to Stephen and to this character who's really taken root in a lot of hearts, has just been so much fun. There's probably 225 or so of these shirts out in the world, as far away as I guess England and Sweden, I believe, or the Netherlands, I think it is. And that's just been a blast to do that. And it started because one day, I after I'd read My Heart is a Chainsaw, this had been September 2022, I tweeted, I need a Jay Daniels is my final girl T-shirt, and I think Steven replied something like, I'd buy that, or I'd love to see that. So
yeah.
I reached out to him and said, hey, would you mind if I worked with a design friend of mine who's done merch for like Kiss and Aerosmith and Poison. His designs
Nice.
are on Budweiser beer cans and stuff, and Harley Davidson and stuff. He's like a really, really talented designer. I bet we could produce something really cool to represent Jay Daniels on a T-shirt. And Steven said, go for it. And so I worked with my designer, sent the designs to Steven, got his approval on it, and he just kind of let me run with it. And so yeah, I've set up the shop about this time last year, jadeshirt.com, and there's still shirts available if anyone wants them, and there are a lot of knockoffs out there. Steven sent me a screenshot of all the like the first Google screen search results of all these places that are knockoffs of the original shirt, and it's just amazing how many pirate sites come up
Yeah.
immediately. Well, I can tell you, I can guarantee you this: they are not going to have this really nice material from Next
Right.
Level Apparel. They will not feel good, and they're not going to look as good either. So definitely get yours from jadeshirt.com. And yeah, it's great to see people just just dig into this character and show their love for it. And my real hope is people wear this shirt around and someone's going to say, well, Jay Daniels, who's that? And I've certainly had that opportunity. Or I've met people who have read Stephen Graham Jones's work at a horror film festival or something, and we strike up a conversation, become friends over it. It's just a little way to help enrich the reading experience. But what an honor to be able to, just for Stephen to allow me to help distribute these shirts. It's been a real blast for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that one of your tweets, I think it's a pinned one, maybe on Twitter, where one of the photos that you have as an example of people wearing it is me and Jesse and Becky Spradford.
Becky Spradford,
when we
yes.
were in Chicago when for Stevens, I think it was the launch day event. Like it was the event for Don't Fear the Reaper. I think it was the day that the book came out.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was very early in that. I think that was like the first photo I saw of the shirt out in public was the three of you. And you all look you're all so beautiful and you look so smart, and you look like you're like really intelligent people having a great time. And that was just perfect. Like, who needs better marketing than that? So I made good use of that photo. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'll forever love Becky, and I will acknowledge she said this in my last episode of the podcast, and we did our 2024 horror preview, because she talked about the Angel of Indian Lake, and her special thing was that she finished reading the Angel of Indian Lake on the day that the book ends. Like, she actually read the finishing parts of the story on the day that story concludes, and nobody else can say that because it hasn't been released yet. So she has a very special connection to that book. I thought was really cool.
Absolutely. I think I remember Steven saying something about completing edits, like the final set of edits before it goes off to the printer on the day that the story within the Angel of Indian Lake ends. And he just felt that was very fitting. So yeah. This trilogy has meant something very special to a lot of people. I asked him one time, like, how many people have read I think My Heart is a Chainsaw? And he's, he didn't have exact figures, but he figures it's tens of thousands of people have read it. I mean, that's a lot of people for something so intense and passionate and powerful to be part of their, part of their consciousness,
Yeah.
and that distributed consciousness of horror readers. So yeah, it's very powerful and special.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into, I think we're going to kind of start out that way, but now, so we're going to dive into talking about My Heart is a Chainsaw specifically. We're going to do our deep dive. And I'm going to preface this by saying that we could spend hours and days and weeks talking about this
Yes.
story. We don't have that kind of time. We're going to do our best to cover the things that we think are the most important or the most interesting. But I want to start out because I don't think that we should read maybe like the synopsis or something, but I thought it would be interesting if we all went around and said how we pitch the book to people when we're recommending it. So, like, what is your quick pitch of what My Heart is a Chainsaw, the story is? Let's do Jesse first.
Oh man, on the spot. I am so bad at being succinct and pitching. It is just, it's not possible. I mean, to me, it's a slasher novel about a traumatized person who doesn't even doesn't believe in themselves and craves justice more or less, or a better world, but they've been so beaten down and broken by their environment that they've lost faith in themselves. And I'm like already like, ellipsis out there. Like I can't go on from there. I mean, it is a slasher. I will say that it's a slasher, but I think it's more than that. I feel like this book it's like an everything everywhere all at once of slashers. It is a slasher. It's a deconstruction of slashers, and it's an evolution of slashers. It is all parts all together. And yeah, I've just never been really good at summarizing. I kind of want to just slap that book in someone's hands and be like, do you like horror? Read this.
Yeah.
let me give you my elevator pitch version of this. I think I've got it down pretty well. So so My Heart is a Chainsaw. Oh, you haven't read this book? Oh my gosh. You know what? I bet you'd love it. So it's about this girl named Jade Daniels, and she's like the town outcast. She's not popular. She doesn't have a lot of money. She's from a broken home. And she is obsessed with slasher films. So much so that it kind of sets her apart. She kind of sticks out like a sore thumb around everyone else. But then in this little town in Idaho where she lives, people start dying, and it looks like there might be a slasher on the loose. And because she's such a fan of the genre, she's the only person in town who knows how to deal with a slasher. So she starts trying to move the pieces in place to get the final girl up to have this confrontation with the slasher, whoever the slasher might be. She's the only person who's really in a position to deal with the emergency and potentially save the town, save lives in town. But it's really a story about an outcast and her, trying to come to terms with who she is and her own brokenness. So yeah, that's kind of how I try to pitch it.
Hell yeah! Now I know what to say.
Well, yeah, and mine is way quicker because I don't get into the so like usually what I say is the main character is a girl who's obsessed with slasher stories like movies and stuff, and because of her knowledge of that type of movie, she noticed that things that are happening in her town really line up with what kind of the beats of a slasher movie are, and so now she's got to try and like warn everybody this is what's going on because they need, they need to know. And she's kind of like the scientist in a disaster movie where like she knows exactly what's going to happen and no one believes her.
Yeah.
And so like it's her struggle with catching up with and dealing with what's about to go down. I don't get into like the emotional motivation side of things. But if pushed, or if I'm seeing someone's on the fence about it, I'll be like, and really what it is like XYZ. But that's kind of my quick pitch is like, is that kind of thing. So yeah. I had another thought and it vanished from my head. So it'll circle back around and it'll come back to me. But so we have kind of a basic outline of things to talk about. And I think because of our pitches and how it has to do with like slasher stories and stuff, Jesse, I think, said it, that it is a slasher. My first talking point is, does this book follow the story structure of a slasher? Does it deviate from the structure? Does it evolve the structure? How much, how meta is it about the idea of a slasher and being a slasher itself?
I'd say it's certainly very meta, in that there is a parallel narrative going on, which is a set of papers that Jade, the protagonist of the main narrative, has been writing, and you see her papers kind of trying to introduce her teacher to the idea of the slasher genre, the slasher film genre, what it means, what its rules are, what motivates various characters, what you're likely to see within slasher films. So it's definitely meta about it, and that parallel structure, I think, is just one of the things that makes the novel so very special, because it's like kind of a set of footnotes come alive, and it really, and as that parallel structure evolves in the next two books, without saying a whole lot of, I don't want to do any spoilers for the next two books in the series, but you do have that kind of parallel narrative going on, and it becomes an intrinsic part of the trilogy. And again, just one of the things that sets it aside, makes it really special. But I would say, is the novel a slasher? Man, I don't have all the slasher rules memorized, but I'm really trying to get familiar with it, especially from the perspective of the films, which is what Jade's interest is in the films. And I'd say it does certainly follow the slasher structure in many ways. For example, she notices that when she finds one of these two Scandinavian kids dead, then she knows the blood, the blood sacrifice,
Yep.
has happened, and that initiates the slasher cycle. So she recognizes within her own story, yep, hey, that's a sign that maybe the slasher cycle has begun. But it definitely deviates, especially by the end, in this one crucial part, and this is really pulling from kind of that core of horror slashers. If you think like Halloween is probably like that first really completely firm example, like that's sort of the quintessential slasher, not the first slasher, but the earliest quintessential one, in that there's a final girl, and she's trying to position the final girl, and she's the protagonist of the story, but she knows she's not the final girl, and of course we as the readers are saying, well, but isn't she the final girl? So that's really a point where it very intentionally deviates from the slasher genre, in that the final girl is not who Jade thinks is the final girl. Letha is not the last girl standing. As far as she knows, Letha, at one point, she thinks Letha's dead. And she knows she can't be the final girl for various reasons that we can go into in this conversation. But I think the fact that it deviates from the quintessential slasher is what makes the character of Jay Daniels so very powerful, and what makes this story so powerful.
What do you think, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I said earlier, I think this book is kind of all of the above as far as slashers go, and that evolution is hands down absolutely the greatest and most important aspect of this story in that particular regard. Where is because she is a final girl and she doesn't believe in herself, and like time and time again, she just doesn't believe in herself. And I think that's a different topic, why she feels that way and all that, very real and whatnot. But the thing that stands out to me so much, and you definitely get that by the end. I mean, it's weird. We're talking about a trilogy here, but we're only talking about the first book. So it's like I'm already kind of getting ahead of everything here. But the idea that we're all final girls, or that anyone is or can be a final girl, is just monumentally important. It's just this belief, this mindset, and kind of a way of looking at things. And it's just, Jade is one of the best characters, and I don't know how many times I cried throughout this entire trilogy, to be honest. And and that thing that I was trying to shy away from there, I'll just say it is like trauma is kind of the central point to her story and her history, and that is really what hits me the most about this book, and it's why she doesn't believe in herself or even think that she is the final girl. She is so insistent that she's not the final girl, even if or when she is, and
Yeah.
that's pretty that hits really hard.
And you think
Yeah.
about all the reasons why she has to believe she's not the final girl. She's not white. I mean, she's half white, half Native American, right? She's not popular. She's not a virgin. We find out in the story she's not. She's not a good student. She's very bright, right? And Mr. Holmes, her teacher, recognizes that in her, and that's one reason why he is a lifeline in her life. But
Yeah.
all these things that she is not, like the Laurie Strode character or the Sydney character, all these things that like that classic final girl represents, she is not any of those things. And then more than anything, like the final girl is not a girl who's been traumatized, sexually abused in the way that she was. So there's no way she could be the final girl. And that's the most potent element, I think, of this novel and the whole trilogy, is that it's not what you look like. It's not all the things that have it's maybe not the things that you've done. It's not the things that have been done to you. It is what you choose to do. I guess when the moment arises that you have to make some tough calls and be courageous, and she certainly does that. I mean, she pulls out all the stops to try to save people, even to their annoyance, especially to the annoyance of Sheriff Hardy, where
Yeah.
she's trying to warn people, and he wants to put her away in a jail cell through the Independence Day watch party of Jaws, because she's gonna start trouble. She's gonna maybe start a panic. People are gonna get angry, but she does everything to try to save the lives of people who frankly look down on her and don't understand her. And she's an oddball.
Yeah.
But none of that stops her from being a final girl. I think that's really one of the main messages of the Jade Daniels character.
And that
Yeah.
brings up a thought that isn't widely brought into the slasher discourse too, about what is and what isn't a final girl and the actions they take. But you hit on something that is at the core and is so important. It's empathy. She is trying to save the people who have mistreated her entire life,
Yeah.
essentially, and that wouldn't give, two shits about her, so to speak. And she does it because it's the right thing to do.
And
Well,
isn't that a funny conundrum? Because she's wanting a slasher cycle to start.
Yeah.
Finally, the world around her will match her interior world, in which she sees, like, for whatever reason. We can talk about this as well. This slasher makes sense to her. I think she's experienced some evil that's so horrifying that turning to horror is a world in which things actually sort of start to map to her own experience and make sense to her. But she wants the slasher cycle to start. And as soon as bodies start dropping, there's a weird sense of glee, but there's also, running in parallel with that, is her sense of duty to find the final girl and prepare her to take on this slasher. So it's not that she really wants people to die, but finally, like, reality, it's her interior world is starting to find a match in the external world, and there's kind of a coming together, things that make sense to her in a way that I think would be psychologically, I guess, relieving to her or fulfilling or something to her. But yeah, no, she jumps right in, and of course puts her own life in grave danger to make sure that the killer is stopped and that people are saved.
Well, I have several thoughts. So, what you just said, Greg, she wants justice, and she knows in a slasher cycle how justice happens. She didn't get justice.
Yeah.
but this is an opportunity for her to see justice. Um, Going back to her being a final girl or not, the thought I have is two things. First of all, um, doesn't this story kind of in a way challenge who decides who has the qualities of final girl? Because she's disqualifying herself because she sees extrinsic judgments of people telling her who she is versus what her actual intrinsic qualities are. And so she's seeing what people are telling her she is, and what society may perceive her as like a disqualification. When we look at her actions and we look at what her motivations are, motivations is a word that comes up several times in this book. She's got the right qualities. I think she qualifies. But here's a thought I've had too. Can you have a final girl? And I'm going to pre-answer this. Yes. Can you have a final girl who has every right to be the slasher?
Oh yeah.
Well, that's sort of the I spit on your grave scenario, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the yeah. I don't even like using the word, but it's the rape revenge type of story, which is I spit on your grave. So
Yep.
I think within I'll say of course I would have real moral questions in the real world of whether like any form of violence would be justified, even in the process of getting revenge, or would that also be justice? Those are important moral questions. But within the horror genre and the slasher genre, I think that precedent is very much set.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Moving on in our discussion of My Heart is a Chainsaw. Um, I don't know how this topic is gonna pan out. It could be the final topic we introduce. It could be quick. I'm not sure. But just a general question: what is it about Jade? So early on in interviews about My Heart is a Chainsaw, when he's talking about when he was writing earlier versions and it wasn't working, and there was different POVs and originally an entirely different kind of narrative kind of main voice. He got feedback that Jade was important, and so at some point Jade became kind of the narrative focus all the way through. So even before the book was finished, there was something special about Jade, and the reaction to the series has been, I think, heavily focused around Jade as a character. So what is it about Jade? Like, do you guys have thoughts on like what makes Jade such a compelling person that we rush to and we want to have in our lives and stuff?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I think more than anything, I think Jade is just purely relatable. Everyone has trauma. Everyone's carrying trauma of some kind around, and a lot of people also have generational trauma on top of their personal trauma. So we can relate to her in that aspect. And the other thing is about her specifically, I mean, anyone who was ever the weirdo, the outsider, the outcast, I can personally relate to that a lot, growing up doing those, the younger years, the high school years, because, she was coming out of high school. And so that's another thing we can relate to her on too. And her obsession with horror can also relate to her on that level. Anyone who loves horror, because thankfully we're climbing out of that, or we have finally climbed out of that, and now we're just soaring through the atmosphere. But
Seriously.
horror was for a long time looked down upon, and it was also reviled and feared even. I mean, I'm pretty confident saying all three of us remember Satanic Panic, and
Yep.
that was real and that was national too. So on multiple levels, she's relatable, and that makes her that much more real and that closer to everyone's hearts. I mean, it's like we are Jade to a level, I don't have the trauma that she has, and I don't have the generational trauma there, but she is just, she's not this unattainable hero or whatever. She's not the glossy person on the magazine cover. She's one of us. So we
Yeah.
feel that much more for her too. And getting to read through her experience, I imagine it helps other people too who are feeling similar to how Jade felt. And that's such a beautiful, wonderful thing that art can give us too. It can give us perspective, it can give us support, and it can even give us courage to move forward in a lot of situations. We could read Jade's journey and identify with that and be like, oh my God, I feel like I know a little more what to do now, or I have that much more hope. And it's really just a miraculous, beautiful thing.
She doesn't believe in herself, right? That's one of the main things about her, is that she struggles with her acceptance of herself or belief in herself that she could amount to anything, or that she could be the final girl, which in her view of reality is like that's kind of the ultimate success, is to be the person who could be the final girl. And so anyone who's ever struggled with their sense of worth, their sense of self-confidence, will definitely relate to her. And yet she ends up being the final girl. And I wonder if it takes people who've always maybe felt like, or for a long time in their lives have felt like the outsider, and says, no, like you can be the final girl in your story. Um, and I will also say, you mentioned how relatable she is. I think there's a degree of believability. Look, there's one little passage in here that just stuck out. I was listening to Carrie G's excellent narration of this on the audiobook, and something really stuck out to me this time that I read it. This is in the chapter Hell Night. I'm going to read just a tiny bit of this. We know that her beloved teacher and her academic foil, but her beloved teacher, Mr. Holmes, was in an accident. Not really an accident. He was essentially shot out of the sky in his ultralight. He hits the lake. We figure he's a goner. He's dead. And well, no, he's actually survived, but looks like he's in a wheelchair on one of the floats here in the big final scene where they're watching Jaws. So he's immobilized. He's in a wheelchair. He's on a float, and that wheelchair goes. She sees him go basically over the side of a float, and he's in the water somewhere. So she's looking for Mr. Holmes. She wants to be able to save him, and she spots it. And it says, again, this is a chapter called Hell Night. She spots him in the water. His head's been opened at his hairline, about probably from the prow of the bass boat, is spilling dates and history out into the water. His twitching left hand finds her right, and Jade pulls him to her, looking around for what she can protect him from. He looks over to her, spits the water from his mouth, and smiles, says, Jennifer, Jade. Jade says back to him, her eyes hot and crying now. He sputters. His left hand finds the back of her head. He runs his fingers across her stubble. She's shaved her head previously. He runs his fingers across her stubble, and she pushes back against this touch, shaking her head no, but holding his hand all the same. A spasm passes across him, his head injury, his brain failing. Jade pulls him closer, tries to hold him higher. There's something about that moment where she doesn't want a man to touch her, to be so intimate as to put his hand on her scalp like that. And yet she won't let go of his hand, even pulls him closer to her. That sense of wanting to have control over her body, because that has been violated when she was very young. We know that part of the story. And yet she wants also to be close and have that almost like maternal protective intimacy with someone, especially someone who's really been like a father figure to her. It's been the teacher and the sheriff who have been that father figure for her. She needs that closeness, that paternal warmth, and yet she's just got this resistance, this pushback, and that is a dynamic tension within her character. I tell you what, having known many people who were the victims, many women who were the victims of sexual abuse, that really rings very true to me. I think people see her act in ways like that, and there's just something that is dead on correct about that characteristic of her. So I think things like that make her so believable and so real that people can't help but empathize with her and side with her. She's the underdog, in this story. And despite everything, despite her own self and her obsessions and her brokenness, she does overcome. And she's going to overcome in a way that's going to get her in trouble. That's going to, as we know later in the second book, we know, I won't say anything. There's a spoiler, but if you have gone on to read Don't Fear the Reaper, there are repercussions for things that she does to literally save the town that end up getting her in trouble. And yet she does it because it's right. How can you not love this girl?
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say about what is it about Jade? She's so weird. She's so, in so many ways, she's so dark. Her obsession with slashers, and yet she's irrepressible. She's just the glee she has as she's on the verge of hypothermia when she goes over to Terra Nova that first time and is talking to shooting glasses and mismatched gloves and cowboy boots, the three construction guys. And she's sitting there freezing to death while trying to explain these rules of the slasher genre. She's irrepressible, and you really just can't help but love this girl.
She really is the evolution. She is a final girl, but she is so much more than that. In that passage that you read, she has every good, solid, super legitimate reason to shut down or to lash out at everyone and everything.
Yes,
but she is radical empathy.
She could have been the slasher. She could have gone the wrong way. She does have the background to have turned her life a very negative direction, and yet she didn't. Sorry, I kind of overran you.
Oh, no. That plays into what I was saying. That's a good point too, is because choices come into it too, and she chooses a different path, but she is an example of radical empathy, and that is monumental. That really that's everything. That passage alone kind of says everything about Jade in the shortest span possible.
It's remarkable. It is just this tiny little nugget that says a whole lot about her and about her interior struggle. And I love, Jesse, I love what you said about this radical empathy. Just as we were saying a moment ago, horror really was looked down upon, and it was part of the, you go back even to like the seduction of the innocent, with the comics back in the 1950s, the EC comics, the horror comics and stuff, even from a legislative standpoint, where the Senate's having hearings about comic books, and Dr. Wortham, I think is his name, was up there saying comic books are leading kids in the wrong direction. They're leading them into bad lives, basically, because it's full of horror and such. Well, now we look at it and we understand, I think, that horror is, and I'm quoting Miguel Rodriguez on this, horror is an empathy building tool. We get that now, but because it came couched in the stories of monsters and killers and horrible things that happen to these characters, I think it's really just taken a few decades for public consciousness to be able to say, no, like there really can be not even just redeeming social value from these stories. The stories are an empathy building tool. And, Joe Hill, I think now famously has said, author Joe Hill, horror is not about extreme sadism. It's about extreme empathy. People are starting to get that now. Again, that's one of these things that we love so much about Jade, is that she can empathize with people out of her own brokenness. And then that's a beautiful thing.
Yep. One of the things, and I want to demonstrate how early in the book you really start to latch onto her. I was crying on page 26.
Wow.
She's talking to the construction folks, and it's after it was just her and shooting glasses. They're sitting in the car, and he's walking into territory that she's not comfortable with, and her resistance to vulnerability is just so intense. And so the quote, and I'll try and read it. She says, I'm fine. Jade finally manages to get out, trying to prove it's okay. She can stay. She can talk all night. She did all her slasher homework. She knows every answer. Please just ask.
Yes.
And like,
Yes.
she's about to lose it.
Yeah.
I'm crying on page 26 because like you could see how fractured this person is.
Yeah.
And like you just want to fix her or make everything better or take the pain away. 26 pages into the 400 fucking page book. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
He
And
does a great job.
she just needs someone to reach out in a way that where she can talk to them with some kind of common language, some kind of common vocabulary. And it happens to be slasher films. And some people can kind of fumble their way a little bit into it. Letha at some point gets really good at it. She's actually started to watch some of these films. And that's a way that later in Chainsaw, she and Letha start being able to connect, because Letha's actually stopped, listened to this girl who she thinks has had terrible trauma in her past. She has. Jade won't admit it. Even among the people who care about her most, she won't admit it at first. But Letha stops and listens, and then she goes and learns a little bit of Jade's language, the language of the slasher, so she can speak with her, communicate with her, and show compassion that way. And here she is on page 26, trying if someone would just ask, she's got all the answers. If someone would just ask her, and people are kind of out of their league with her. She's gone so far into the world of slashers, as I guess her escape from the trauma that she's experienced, that most people don't know how to communicate with her, and yet there's still people who care about her. They don't know what to do with her. That's a very kind of classic kind of I guess Midwestern or Western kind of thing. I don't know what to do with her, but she's ours, she's very endearing in her vulnerability.
Yeah. I want to tag on to that passage that you read, Greg. An observation about just the cinematic kind of format that kind of creeps into the way Jones writes this, whether he is trying to or not. But this is a very like specific example. Jade lets him float away back into the frothing blood. She screams, back into the frothing blood, the screams, the mayhem, all the volume dialing back up for her now. Exactly what would happen in an actual film where like that background noise is like really dialed down for that poignant moment. And then as the moment fades, all of the chaos comes back, and he wrote it that way in words. And so, there's that cinematic kind of quality to the way that he writes a lot of stuff, but it's like, it's almost a shorthand for getting you to know what he's saying, because that's like 20 words that tell you, hey, you remember in movies when this happened, that's what's happening right now. I feel like that was a really good example of like the type of thing he does in these books.
Yeah, and there's a moment earlier in the Hell Night chapter when Jade arrives, things are already starting to break loose, and she sees we are aware of the specter of the Lake Witch, the little girl Stacy Graves with her long black hair and her ratty dress, and that she's supernatural, or she's a ghost or a witch or something supernatural. At least that's the story, that's the local legend, and in fact, we're starting to get hints that maybe it's more than just a legend. But then she shows up there, and there's a bunch of people dressed up like Stacy Graves, and it's not like played up a whole lot like this is a source of a lot of chaos. But there's a moment there where when we eventually see this on film or TV, it's just gonna happen. I'm sure of it. Yep. There's a moment where the director, if they take that scene and look at that a little bit, there's a great moment for the director to set up a bunch of children dressed just like Stacy Graves, and it's like that scene out of Raiders of the Lost Ark where Marion's being carried away by the bad guys in a big wicker basket, and Indy's following after her, and then he turns a corner and there's suddenly all of these baskets out there. You don't know which one she's in, and he's tearing off lid after lid after lid. It's that kind of moment that I think Stephen doesn't elaborate on a lot, but it's that kind of moment where now the director of that film adaptation has a moment to say, whoa, hold on. If Stacy Graves is real, if she's here, and if she's killing people, which one is it? And I just love that it's seeded for a film adaptation.
And see, my thought when you were explaining that was was it Scream 2 or Scream 3, like the opening scene where it's like at the movie of Stab
Scream, yeah,
and
Scream two,
everybody's
Scream two,
Scream 2.
yes,
So like where better place for a killer to show up than in a bunch of than like where everybody's dressed like the killer, like,
yes,
and knowing Steven's such a Scream fan, like that's kind of where my
yeah.
mind went.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's wild. I don't know that he's talked about if he's just been asked, are you interested in directing film? I think maybe he has been, and he has been asked, and maybe uh, didn't respond very affirmatively, like he would love to do that. But boy, he sure envisions his stories
Yeah.
cinematically.
Um, I moving on to the next topic. I pitched this one in our little outline, and I explained myself. So I'm going to start with like my thoughts, and then I'm going to see what you guys. I'm going to bounce it off of you guys. So the question is, what does Jade get out of her obsession with slashers? And my theory, and I think it's pretty true to the story, and it's kind of more or less said. So I'm not taking credit for being a genius on this. Is that it's control. Like the idea of a slasher is that there are specific things that happen in specific order. People have duties, or not duties, but like have roles that they play, and it's very predictable. Um, and so she knows what to do. She knows how to act. Like there's an understanding of like, as long as X, Y, and Z happens, the outcome will be this. So there's control and not chaos. But also, there is a promise of justice in a situation like this. So like, I feel like it's attractive to her because like the trauma that she experienced at the hands of people that she should trust more than anybody was a chaotic moment, was something that there was no possibility for control. There was no way for her to know what to do, how to act, how to respond. Um, she was let down by the people closest to her in her life. And so finding something to latch onto that has a structure and a system and has an answer and like a predictable outcome is like her way of being in a world that makes sense, and like that she feels that she can navigate and protect herself, I guess, basically. So agree, disagree, have something to add? Did I miss something? What do you guys think?
I agree. I think it's a combination of control and justice. Probably justice first um, on there, and yeah, but also just why slashers in general. I mean, it's kind of like what I was talking about with the werewolf thing in a bad horror movie earlier, where you're gonna get something cool if you're watching a comedy and the jokes aren't landing. Then it's kind of just shot. But you know,
Yeah.
even in like a bad or low budget horror movie, you're still probably going to get a really cool monster or a really cool set piece or something. You know, you're going to get something in there that makes it worth your time watching, which is completely different from any other genre. At least in film, anyway. I know it's weird. We're talking about a book, but I just immediately went to cinema. But yeah, I mean, there's always going to be something you can pull out of a horror movie or out of a slasher that you can't always do out of other modes of storytelling.
Yeah, I think what she kind of gets out of her obsession with slashers, I think the idea of control makes a whole lot of sense there. And it is a world in which the narrative is one that kind of maps to the experience that she's already had as a child, where her mom's not involved in her life, her dad is abusive, her dad's friends are hanging out in her home making lewd comments about her, and she is a kid. She's, I guess, 17, I think, in during these events, but like, her Rexall is there in the house with them a lot, and he's just a bad person, a real scuzzball, and he's making lewd comments about her in front of her and in front of her dad, and her dad is just kind of laughing along, like
Yep.
what a horrific kind of home life to grow up in. And I think, like with horror and with really going back to Greek tragedy and Shakespeare, when you're watching these stories that are about horrible things that happen, you are able to re-experience the things that have frightened you or that have traumatized you, but you're able to re-experience them in safety. You know this is a story, and I think especially as we're young children, and that division, that dividing line between reality and story is a little harder to find at times. Stories really can scare you. Movies really can scare you. And it becomes, like seeing something really terrifying on screen can feel like a real life and death moment to you. I don't experience that now as a grown up, but to a child, maybe that dividing line is a little bit harder to find. But generally, though, with scary stories, tragic stories, we can re-experience our own trauma at a safe distance. I think that's part of what draws her to slashers. But it maps to her world. Like think about being a kid and you don't know when your dad is going to hit you, humiliate you, or in her case, sexually abuse you. What else would that emotionally map to but a slasher where people are always looking over their shoulder, wondering if someone's going to come up behind them and stab them in the back?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's finally a world in which I'm seeing stories that map to my own experience as a traumatized kid. And there's also, I'm sure, something about just the outsider nature of those
Sure.
films, having been looked down upon and yet championed by the outsider. And here she is, the outcast of town. And I think it maps to her experience in powerful ways.
What do you guys think about the concept was kind of talked about a few times in the book, especially at moments where Jade is kind of second guessing her read of the situation and trying to like see how it fits, see what story she needs to think about to like understand what's going down. Where it's kind of explained that like there's like in a slasher kind of arc, there's the original thing that creates the revenge kind of motivation. But then when the killing gets to a certain point, when the killing gets out of control, the final girl is really a way to govern that action of the slasher and is almost like the counterpoint, like they're equals. And like it's up to her to like kind of cap off that action. And so like in a way, if you look at a power dynamic, the slasher and the final girl kind of should be equally matched. They're almost like mirror images in a way. So what do you guys think about that? Did you get that from the way that Jones was looking at it?
I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that makes a whole lot of sense the way you're saying it. And you like no one would look at Laurie Strode and think she's an equal to Michael Myers, and yet she becomes that equal, and she needs to become that to stop exactly what you said. And yes, Jay does certainly narrate that the cycle of cleaning the slate, the universe, whatever, sends out a monster to clean the slate because some terrible injustices have been done. And that cleaning takes place, and then the final girl has to come in and stop the cycle. But the final girl, well, she's just a girl. She's a high school girl. She's like a nice, soft, kind, good-natured, more likely to be a forgiving type. Well, just like Letha, very virtuous, compassionate, and kind. One of the few people, she barely knows Jade, and yet she's reaching out to her with compassion and is concerned about her. And she has to become steel to take on that monster and stop this from before it goes from being a kind of revenge cleaning the slate to simply an atrocity.
Yeah.
The resilience in Jade is astounding because she becomes a thing at the same time rejecting it or declaring louder than loud that I am not this. At the same time, she is that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
And I feel like it's slightly relative. It seems like a thing that we've kind of been dancing around a little bit too. And something that is so central is that the idea that no one gets to decide your worth. No one gets to tell you who or what you are. Yeah. And that's a big societal thing too. And Jade doesn't believe in herself because of what others have told her or how others have treated her. But even when she doesn't believe in herself, over time, she starts to decide who she is for herself. And that transformation is even better than any final girl taking down the big bad transformation.
And what she decides ultimately, and especially as you get into the second and third books, what she decides to be is not the homecoming queen. She's not. She's going to be the final girl in maybe a spiritual, moral way, but not in a conventional sense. She's never going to be like, well, what role does her society of Proof Rock, Idaho, have for her? It's probably to follow in her mom's footsteps and be the cashier at Family Dollar. That's what society expects. She's a high school dropout. I mean, she hasn't. Maybe she'll get her diploma if she can do enough of the like extra credit work for Mr. Holmes and finally get that last credit she needs to pass. But yeah, she's essentially a high school dropout. She's not. She doesn't wear the right clothes. She doesn't read the right books or watch the right movies. She's not going to church or whatever. All the things that society would want her to be that that virtuous person, that kind of paragon of a young woman. But she decides on her own to be what she's going to be. But she struggles. She struggles a lot with her sense of, I guess, self-worth and her own like initiative to become what she wants to be.
Yeah. There's a couple of different directions I think we could go in. I've got a handful of topics. I don't know if it's too early, but like one of my earlier thoughts kind of mid outline is, what's the moral of the story? What's our takeaway? What's the bigger picture? I don't know if we should talk about that yet.
No.
Yeah.
Not
so
yet.
like,
well, but I think the way I kind of read the book in general is I think we've actually covered that in some ways. No one's going to, no one else society, popular opinion doesn't have to determine who you will be. You don't have to live by other people's rules. Anyone can be the final girl. It's not about how you look or how good you are in school or whatever. And I think we have covered that. But if you guys have that would be my takeaway from it, the moral of the story. But if you guys have other thoughts on that and you want to hold on to them, that's certainly fine.
I just had a thought too, and this probably isn't maybe right for the episode, but it popped in my head, and I wonder what you two think of it. Jade never thinking she's the final girl and not believing in herself is almost like the flip side of the coin to Buffy Summers not wanting to be the Slayer. And have you two watched that whole show by chance?
I have not. Yeah. I've never watched it.
I'm going to stop it because I don't want to spoil it, because I was totally going to say a major spoiler, which I related to the trilogy.
Everyone else has seen it except me, I'm sure. So I have no problem with you spoiling it. But yeah, I'm familiar with it as a show. I've just never watched it.
Is the spoiler that Joss Whedon was the big bad the whole time?
No, but
I've heard about that.
That is the truth, but that's not it. It's at the end of the series, what they do is, through a spell and other things like that, is with the Slayer, there's only one. There's only one Slayer at a time, and when a Slayer dies, a new Slayer comes forth. But what they do at the end is they call forth all Slayers.
Huh.
So every girl is a Slayer. Like, every girl is the final girl.
Yeah.
Like on Earth, like all of them who live.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not remembered so well. It's been so long since I've seen it. I don't think it's every single girl. It's certain people somehow, for whatever reason, are born Slayers. Some are, some aren't. But everyone who is born as a potential Slayer is unlocked, so to speak. Usually,
Wow.
you're not until the one before you dies, but now they unlocked all of them, so every potential is now there and doing it. And
Yeah.
Oh wow! So yeah, I totally see how that relates
Yep.
here.
Yeah.
Anyone can be a final girl.
yeah,
So, all right, let's take it in a different direction. This isn't something that's necessarily on the outline that I have prepared, but we talked a lot about Jade and we talked a lot about the serious stuff, but like, let's talk about the horror. Let's talk about the kills. Let's talk about like, holy shit, Jones knows how to write gory, scary stuff.
yeah.
Yes.
But like, I think the first thing I wanted, like early on in the book, I started taking note of all of like these different things that were like kind of horror foundation that support the story that we get. So like the Lake Witch, Stacey Graves. So like that's one of the elements of the book that's a horror convention that is introduced early on. Ezekiel, the preacher, and like Drown Town, like the preacher who like, you know, his whole congregation drowned and like weirdly consecrated the lake and everything. And like, so Ezekiel, there's a lot of potential with that in a horror construct. There's Camp Blood. There's the stuff that happened at Camp Blood.
There's also wild animals all around that can, especially bears, that
Bears.
can
Yeah.
kill at any time. It's actually they're on the verge of a national forest, which
Yep.
is, you know, essentially wilderness. And I'm sure like elk, they're large animals, you know.
Mhm.
You know, there are just natural dangers, or you know, the dangers of having a lake that can freeze over, you know, getting trapped under ice or whatever. There's a lot of danger all around.
And isolation.
And-
I mean,
Yeah.
you can only take the water, cross the water to get to Terra Nova.
Yeah.
It's built-in
Yeah.
isolation, which talk about red flags in a horror story.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. He built in a lot of potential early on, and there was just so much room to explore. But I fucking love, and it's very memorable, the first blood, like that initial kill where it's like these two travelers who are not local. And what was the transgression that got them killed? They
They were naked.
They
They got rid of their clothes and went out, essentially
They took-
skinny dipping.
They took the town boat.
They stole the town canoe.
That's what it was. Yeah.
That's what it was. They
Yeah.
took the town boat, but then they also did the frisky, sexy stuff. But
Yeah.
that was enough. And they were doing stuff when they weren't like, you know, like when it's a quiet time, and like obviously like kind of a theme of like Stacey Graves is like being disturbed from just trying to rest and like be with her mom. So like that was fucking awesome though. Like of having read the book when it first came out and not till now, that was this thing that kind of like was really vivid in my mind, was like that first kill. And that, I don't know if you guys translated it, but when Sven is getting killed and he says something in like Dutch or whatever, did you translate that?
I didn't.
It says, "What's wrong with her mouth?" That's
Yeah.
what Sven says.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because of the jaw thing.
Yeah,
Like he was
yeah.
telling
Oh,
us
that's
without telling us
horrific.
that it was Stacy that attacked him. Like he told us without telling us in the first few
Yeah.
pages of the book.
Yeah.
And like, oh, so good. So like that was very cool. But
Oh, that's
do you guys have any
creepy.
thoughts on like the general horror of the book and the kills and the scariness and all that?
Beyond its top notch.
It is an immense variety. It really, like I think about Theo Mondragon in the outfit that, you know, where he's got the you know, the breathing apparatus, the, you know, and a
the
nail
gas
gun.
mask. Yep.
Yeah, he's got a nail gun. He's walking around shooting people with a nail gun. That's there's just so many elements. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot, and of course, a lot of things come together in that Hell Knight chapter. Rob, I know you'd commented like, you know, most of these chapters are like 20, 30 pages long. And then you get to those last couple of chapters and they're like suddenly like 50 plus pages. Like he is drawing together so many threads, especially in the final big attack where you've got this great, wonderful set piece with they're all watching Jaws on a floating movie screen and everyone's
Yeah.
out on their floats and their little boats, and they're dressed up. It's like Halloween in the summer. Instead of Christmas in July, it's Halloween in July, essentially.
Yep.
And what a great lot of people in a wonderful scene in which to unleash chaos and so all of these different elements, from Theo Mondragon and even like her dad Tab Daniels and other characters you've seen, good people, really rotten, awful people, running around, and then find the one just super potent menace, this little girl who got separated from her mom and not cared for by the community, and had to eat out of, in the back alleys like a cat, eating out of people's trash. It's a terribly tragic scene that you've got there with Stacey Graves. There's just so many moments of so many elements of violence and the various kills. It's honestly, it's a lot to keep up with. You really kind of have to pay attention to it.
Oh yeah.
I could be I'm probably just reading a whole lot into this, and overcomplicating it, because like the Agatha Christie character Hercule Poirot, who's always accused of making things complicated when they don't need to be. My brain kind of does that too. But with that that opening kill too, they're from the Netherlands, which is the Dutch, and there was the Dutch East Trading Company, and they're in Indian Lake. So them being Dutch and being in Indian Lake alone might be enough of a transgression to kill them.
Yeah. Wow.
Like just
great catch.
Oh, that's interesting. I definitely had not thought of that.
But it's probably not even that at all, because it doesn't even necessarily have to be anything. It's just a cool scene too. But I'm like, all right, like how complex can I build this up to? Maybe, or just make a labyrinth in my brain of all the things that are going around. And like Greg was talking about, the whole Jaws on the water thing, which alone is a great idea, but that is one of the all-time greatest set pieces in literature ever. And it is built for the screen. It is so built for the screen. It's built for the screen and built for a screen on the water too. To watch an adaptation of that on the water, which is another thing that I've always loved. I've always had this fascination with movies within movies or plays within plays. And it couldn't be more perfect than the idea of watching an adaptation of this on the water somewhere.
Not to be too off topic, but the fact that like the last third of this book is basically like a shot for shot remake of the end of Jaws.
Wow.
Raw Shark Text by Stephen Hall. The end of it is basically like the big showdown with the shark at the end, in like a different kind of format. But like there is some resonance to that story where it was like one of those things we'd never fucking seen before, and it created terror in a way that we weren't expecting. And I had a pool in my backyard. I had a 27-foot pool. It was nothing a shark could ever even hope to fit in. And I tell you, as a kid, if I was alone in that pool, I was convinced that there was a shark in there.
Wow. Yes. It works. It works on your mind in ways that we can't always, repress.
Yep. But yes, such a good setting for like introducing kind of a new cycle of violence as well. Like it has been, because it's almost like Jaws was scary and it created this kind of like universal fear of the thing. But it's been around so long that now it's almost like a joke. It's like, we're doing this because it's a kitschy fun thing to do. What better place to just reintroduce terror than a place where like it's become safe? Like that's really cool. Yeah.
Yes. Another kill that always caught my attention was the yacht scene when people start dying and there's like a gunshot blast through a door right over Jade's head. And there's the moment when you see Tiara Mondragon, Theo's new wife, just kind of pedaling her feet through the air as she's been pitched off the top of the yacht, and then she like comes down on one of these columns that are holding up the floating dock, and
Yep.
just impales herself on it. But the pinwheel, I think he describes it as a pinwheeling her legs. Oh, it's just awful, and just what ends up happening with those people, and in some cases, I think it's hard to even make out what piece belongs to what person, and it's just awful.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a handful of just kind of random quotes that I think kind of illustrate like different good things about the book. Do you guys have anything highlighted? I know, Greg, you had a few and you already did one of yours, but like there's certain things that like, and we could build conversation around it. It might just be a quick thing to acknowledge, but like I have little things like, I feel like Jones has a really good way of like shorthanding an understanding of what he's describing. Like he knows how to tap into an existing image in your head in a way that I think is really effective, and I don't think a lot of authors can do this. But like earlier in the book, he says she's already running like a rag doll down the pier, that kind of running that's all untied boots that you have to lift your chin for because you know you're going so fast.
Yes, yeah,
Everybody feels that. Anybody who reads that knows exactly what that looks like and feels like. He can just like shortcut into your brain in a way that I think is really remarkable. And like I feel like that's one of the examples of like where he knows how to find something that's a universal experience to get you to see what he's seeing.
yes, yeah. It's really kind of a poetic gift to have, and he deploys it constantly. It's very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
It is really, yeah, it's impressive. It's incredible too, and a lot of that stuff reminds me of filmmaker John Sayles. John Sayles he also like time and time again does the same thing, and also brings this empathy and this understanding to the worlds that he's writing about. But he never eschews the horrors of the worlds that his characters are living in, or the world around us in real life. And like Lone Star, that film in particular, and also Limbo, I feel like they do a lot of the same lifting that Steven does in his books, and it's just really hits the core of the human experience, and it's sometimes a rarity too to get that, at least in this day and age. Everything's moving so fast, and it's gone in a blip. We're beyond Warhol's 15 minutes of fame. It's like we're now living in the 15 seconds of fame, and there's no time to stop and ponder and appreciate, or even just kind of be for that moment too. And it's an incredible thing that he's really touching on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um,
You think about memorable quotes, and this is the one that I've probably seen more than any other out of My Heart is a Chainsaw. And it's the scene where there's kind of an intervention staged with,
yep.
Sheriff Hardy and Mr. Holmes and Letha approach Jade, and they want to kind of confront her with the possibility that her acting out, in their view, is related to having been abused by her dad. And during this moment, is really a moment where she's denying that ever happened, and she's resisting their understandably. I get it. It's extremely awkward. She doesn't want to go back and address the pain that she's been through, so she resists. And they're like, I mean, is it possible that you were abused by your dad, and that's why you're into these dark things, into these slashers, and your all your Hardy says, all your gothic stuff, the way you dress, your attitude, the trouble you're always. That's just me, Jade tells him, blowing her smoke out now as underline. Horror's not a symptom; it's a love affair. And
Yeah.
while she's spending that time saying something that's kind of untrue, which is that no, I wasn't abused by my dad. I just love horror. Okay. And yeah, that line there, horror is not a symptom, it's a love affair, has, I think that's a very true thing for her, and for a whole lot of people. That has resonated. That one line has
Yeah.
resonated with more readers of this book than probably any other line. So yeah, that's always a favorite quote there.
I've got something that stood out for me this reading that, and I think my mind doesn't necessarily like rank the poignancy of different things as much as sometimes it looks for the effectiveness of things. And so like, yeah, that line definitely hit me too, Greg, but like I also tag the weirdest shit. And so like this may seem random, but she's thinking about like the death of someone and like how it's almost like it's an analysis of like people need to die in a slasher because that's what happens. But like she has this kind of empathy moment, and it's let's see, it sucks that it had to hurt so bad, and it was pretty scary, and they really had other plans, and their families are going to be sad, and who's going to feed their dog? And that moment where she thinks who's going to feed their dog, that tells you everything right there. Like it says what the future without this person is. And so like just reading who's going to feed their dog, it puts a dog in an empty room in silence, and it shows you the aftermath, the impact of this bad thing that's happening in a way that's like really effective to me. And I love it when there's things like that where like it's just there's a resonance that's so great off of such a small kind of compact thought.
And it makes
There's nothing.
Oh, sorry, Greg. Go ahead.
There's nothing florid about that language. It's very simple, very plain language,
Right.
and yet it encapsulates a view that like a pretty young kid could hear those words and say, "Oh, geez, yeah, what about the dog?" And it communicates to your inner child or whatever. It communicates very powerfully,
Yep.
deceptively simple. Yeah.
It makes it that much more cinematic too, because it's clips, it's edits, it's very Eisenstein. You know, the idea that you show a person and then you show a bowl of food and then you show that person again and we infer the meaning of it. And we are seeing everything that she's talking about. We're seeing that dog. We're seeing an empty dog dish and everything together. And I'm very radically, like just in an instant, turning wheels here quickly because there was another thing I wanted to touch on, and it's Hardy above all things too. And it's also fathers. Stephen writes great fathers. He writes the best fathers. And a lot, like, I mean, it's why we cry reading all of Stephen's books too. It's love. And we get that a lot in there. We've got Dodd, and it came from Del Rio. And we've even got William Colton Hughes, which the love is still there. The father is still there. We've got that. And we've got fathers, and we've got Hardy in this book. And as much as, like, Rob, you touched on it earlier, it's like when Jade finally surfaced, that changed everything, and it formed the story. And because it wasn't, it was originally lake access only, and it wasn't kind of working, but then Jade came along, and that made it. But Hardy came along too.
Yeah.
And the moment I met Hardy, so to speak, I knew he was going to die. And I knew it was going to rip my freaking heart out too when he died.
Yeah.
So that the fathers, they're always there. And it's all of them too. Parents are all, mothers and fathers are there in all these stories. And it all comes down to love. I mean, we were talking about radical empathy earlier. We have radical love too. I mean, love and empathy are the real keys here.
Yeah. Dude, and that makes me think, I'm going to tangent a little bit because like Jesse, we were hanging out. You came out to visit a few years ago. We just randomly watched Donnie Darko, which was a movie that I had watched and enjoyed, but it never really fully clicked for me. And you said something so simple, like right before or right after we watched that movie. And it was just like, yeah, it's a movie about love or something like that. So simple. And then the moment I looked at it from that perspective, and I saw that everything Donnie did was because he loved his family, I was like, everything makes sense. Everything makes sense. And I can't tell you how many books, stories, movies that are so fucked up. And I'm like, it's a love story. Also, this happens.
I like
And I
that.
feel like,
Also, this happens.
but it's true. And like, yeah, there's like such a theme of love. Yeah. Yeah. To grasp too on this. Sorry,
Yeah,
Greg. I know
people
you're about
think
to say something.
the story is about cannibalism. Well, the movie is a cannibal movie, but no, really, it's about a relationship between two people or whatever. Yeah, I mean that's
Well,
part of the power of storytelling, and especially
he's
in the
talking
horror
about
genre.
he's talking about Hannibal now. That's what we're
Well, I
the
think it
TV
was
show.
Bones and All is what I'm thinking of there, but
I know. I was
I'm
joking.
sure it applies to more than one piece of art.
You had something you were going to go with there, Greg?
Yeah, thinking about mothers and fathers, one thing that I I think is an outcome of Jade's experience, the fact that she is a survivor. It's not just because she's alive at the end of the story. Let me read. I'm going to read the very end of this. A couple of paragraphs here. So Jade is now, she survived the Lake Witch and Theo Mondragon. She was caught taking that machete and put it into her through her dad's neck, though she didn't realize it was him. She was whatever, and now that's been caught on video. She basically knows that she's going to be going to prison if she even lives
Survives.
any
Yeah.
longer. So her life's going downhill from here. So she just says, "I'm done with it." And she goes over to the other side of the lake, and the forest is on fire. She thinks she can maybe save the day by getting up into the dam. Well, while she's up there on the dam, she sees a little bear cub followed by mama bear coming down toward the control room, and then she sees why they're running, not just running away from the fire, but Jade looks behind them down the line of the dam, and they weren't running from the fire. They were running from what's running from the fire. The trash bear, a big, ragged boar, his fur scorched and smoking, his face scarred from claws and teeth, or maybe fights with dumpsters. It doesn't matter. What does is that, just like the hamsters, Jade knows, everybody in Proof Rock knows, Papa bears eat baby bear every chance they get. They're easy pickings and tasty besides. Jade stands, shaking her head. No, no, please. At the end of the dam, the air swirls clear enough for her to make out this trash bear standing, carving the air with his massive claws, his roar filling every iota of space. And then what Jade's always known to be a lie, what she would never believe, what all the nature shows have been lying to her about, what starts her heart like the chainsaw it is. The mama bear tucks her cub up under herself, steps forward over it, and roars even louder than the trash bear, her lips quivering from it, her rage saliva misting out before her. And Jade doesn't speak bear, but she gets this all the same.
Yeah.
Dude, you're gonna make me cry here again.
No,
Again.
I was thinking, like, how did he get through that without just like the voice cracking? Because Jesus Christ.
It's because we're leaning to this last paragraph here. This mother's saying that if this bad man wants her baby, then he's going to have to come through her to get it. And Jade has to look up to the sky to keep her eyes from spilling. And for a moment, the smoke parts enough for a grainy line of sunlight to filter through, find the palm of her hand when she reaches up to try to hold this feeling for as long as she can. I think survivorship for her is her realizing even nature is showing her a mom should protect her daughter
Yeah.
from her ravenous father. Jade, what you experienced, that's not normal. It's not right. Even nature, as savage as it is, you should be able to expect your mama to step up and protect you. And that didn't happen for her. but what she's holding on to with everything she's got as long as she can, and she's here out here in the dam with smoke everywhere. She's in her underwear now. She's hungry. She's hydrated, and what she's holding on to, and she's cold, and what she's holding on to with everything she's got is this feeling that what happened to her was wrong. It never should have happened. It was tragic. It was an injustice. If she
Yeah.
can hold on to that, then there's a sense in which there's a rightness to the world that she hasn't experienced, but that she can believe in. And when the first time I read that and I saw that image, it was, I got shivers from it.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Because there's this maternal instinct that even these savage bears have that was missing from her life, and she should have had it, and she's holding on to that like there is something that's right in the world, even though she did not experience it herself. I think, to me, again, I think that's what survivorship means to her, not just that she's alive, but she can recognize that what happened to her was injustice, and it should have been otherwise. And there's a moral rightness to the universe in seeing, I guess, kind of a Mother Nature stepping in to show her something. And even the fact that there's this one stream of light coming down in her palm. It's her road to Damascus experience was delivered by the savage nature. And I think that connection with nature becomes more and more important the further we go into this trilogy.
Yeah. And I thought it was like, one of the things that illustrates that throughout the book, the mother kind of part, her understanding of mothers is how, like, every time Jade thinks about a mother, whether it's her mother or like a motherly situation, is in like a negative, like a mother would never, a mother wouldn't. And it's because her mother,
abandoned her. Her mother
failed
abandoned her.
Didn't stop the thing from happening. And so like it's just such a inverse of colors, like an inversion of colors. Like the mother to her is, and is a negative, but like not like it just doesn't fit. Like the visual of a mother is like what they don't do or what they shouldn't do because her mother failed her in that respect. And it's very obvious, like the whole time. So, yeah.
And I think, again, no spoilers for Don't Fear the Reaper, but her mom Kim comes into the picture very powerfully in Reaper, and we get to explore her character more and get to understand kind of what. And there's a beautiful chapter that just kind of paints a picture of what her life is like and her experience when she, on the rare occasion when she bumps into Jade, what it's like, and it's painful, but there's something really powerful about seeing it from her point of view, and then kind of following with her thread there, how it kind of culminates in Reaper. It's a very powerful moment.
Yeah. I'm going to pause to acknowledge that of the three of us, two of us have already read The Angel of Indian Lake, and I'm not one of them. So you guys know the full picture. Just want to acknowledge that there's not bitterness in my tone. I promise. But I just have a couple of random things. I'm just going to throw out a couple of random things that I thought were really, because like there's so much complexity to a Jones story, but I don't want to undervalue the fact that some things are just fucking cool or badass.
Yes.
So like really quick little lines like she's 17 and it's cold 30 in the dead morning.
Yeah.
I've been there before.
Yeah. Again, relatable. We've all been 17 and it's cold 30 in the dead morning. Random thoughts to herself. Like, let's see, when the bodies are accumulating, there's always room for one more, right? Just a random thought. I love that. I thought here's something that has been just tickling my brain, and I don't know if it's just me wanting the story to have a flaw or if there's something to this. So I'm gonna float this at you guys, and I'm gonna see what you think. the founders at one point, and for anybody, hopefully you've read this, the founders are the Terra Nova people who are starting that new community. And at the graduation ceremony, they announced that they're going to pay for college for every student of the high school starting in the class after Jade's. And of course, Jade's reaction is bitterness. Like, of course, this is going to happen after I no longer qualify. Here's my problem with that. And I don't know if you guys thought about this or not. Maybe this is like where Jesse's talking about, like, I just think too like complicated about things. She didn't graduate. Technically, she could finish her high school in the following year and on a technicality qualify to have college paid for her. That's not the way that she looks at it. She looks at it as, oh, this is another thing that is not something that I can get. This is another like thing that's keeping me down in life. And I always thought that like she technically could finish school next year, be a graduate of next year, and qualify to get free college. Do you guys, does it matter? Am I thinking too deeply on this one? Because like that was a kink in the story where I was like, this could be a good thing if she like looked at it the right way.
I don't think you're thinking too complicated about it. I think it says a lot about her mindset, but I'm probably thinking too much about it now because that to me digs into generational trauma and whatnot. And like she's half indigenous, Native American, Indian, whatever, one's preferred term is. And why would she qualify or trust that? Why wouldn't she be scammed out of it? Even if she did technically qualify.
They'd never give that to us, like that kind of a thing. Yeah. Yep.
And well, she is trying to graduate. She's trying to do extra credit to get this final credit she needs from Mr. Holmes. So maybe she is expecting that she will graduate by completing the assignment during the summer after she's done her community service and whatever else she has to do. So I think maybe, I suppose she could just at that point not complete it and then have to go back to school for her senior year if it would be allowed. I don't know. You hadn't really thought about that.
For some reason, that was one thing that was just burrowing in my brain, and I couldn't let it go because like everything is so tight about this story, and this is the one thing where I'm like, this is ambiguous, and so
is it that everyone starting with the next class who graduates gets free college, or is it with everyone who is a freshman starting the next year in 4 years when they start graduating?
No, because they said class of the year after. Yeah. So like that's what introduced the ambiguity for me. But again, could be thinking too hard. That's the downside to like reading in preparation for a deep dive is like you really deep dive in your brain about stuff.
Does Jade see herself as college material? I mean, would she have gone on to college? I know she wants to kind of get out of Proof Rock. College would be a way to do that. But I just don't happen to recall, was college really kind of on her radar?
In the very beginning of the book, in a kind of brief thought about escaping Proof Rock, college is the thing that will get you out. And I don't know if the only thing is, I don't remember if she's thinking about it in the context of how other people are escaping or as an option for herself, but she does think that way. I just don't remember if it's something that she applies to herself or not. And probably not, because like she's got this kind of like image of herself as like, everybody thinks I'm going to fail, so that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have a couple other notes. First of all, the Bible being a slasher, I thought was really interesting.
Remind me that reference. I just don't happen to remember that reference.
It was about, because it was like specifically like she was analyzing and thinking about revenge. And so like when she's thinking about revenge, she's thinking about, I think, the sending of plagues. And I am no person, I'm not a person who's very familiar with the Bible, but like it was through the lens of vengeance and how God or whatever had been vengeful against people. And so
Yeah.
that for
Yeah.
that reason, technically the Bible would qualify as a slasher. And I was
Hmm.
like, I never would have thought of that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting that got consideration. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some, very disturbing. And it's funny, and I'm a lifelong churchgoer myself, and it's funny to have, members of the Christian religious community who are so opposed to like their children watching a horror movie or reading a horror book. And I'm like, you have actually read our holy scriptures, right? Because there's a whole lot of I mean, there's a great ghost story with King Saul and the Witch of Endor. There are the 10 plagues. There are some
yeah,
horrific scenes where there is sexual abuse, and there are, of course, obviously miracles. Lot's wife turns to salt.
yeah,
Ananias and Sapphira aren't completely honest about some land dealings, and they drop dead in the presence of the early followers of Christ, etc. There's like a whole lot of horrific moments. So please don't let your kids read the Bible if you're really that worried about horror, my fellow churchgoers.
yeah. And I knew that you. If I don't know how active you are in religion now, but I knew that you were a more religious person, so I was interested to hear what you had to say about
Yeah,
that.
I'm in church every Sunday, and that's is definitely still part of my life, and it's I totally when I hear people like Laird Barron, for example, talk about the Old Testament God. People like to sometimes think that God was pretty different in the Old Testament. And the new one, he's a lot, he seems to be nicer. Or if you think of Jesus as representing him in some way, Jesus certainly is kind to the downtrodden and stuff. Oh, but in the Hebrew scriptures, the First Testament or Old Testament, he's really quite mean or whatever. I think I certainly wouldn't put it that way myself, but I get it. Like there are absolutely some terrible consequences that people go through because of their decisions. It's also just like a really really chaotic time. So like moments in the book of Judges, for example, where there's just really really horrific things going on. So I can see that, especially I suppose with the 10 plagues. That's a cycle right there.
Yeah,
And it is therefore a real specific purpose, which is this Pharaoh is keeping the Hebrew people slaves in Egypt. And so you picked on the wrong people according to these texts, and God sends one plague after another, and they just get basically increasingly worse until the last one is to take the firstborn child of all the Egyptian people. So I suppose that when you think about like the slasher cycle, well, there's a cycle of of vengeance or justice
right.
there that God brings down on the Egyptian people. And yeah, of course, I grow up reading those stories and said like, yay for the Hebrew people. You know what? People today in Egypt might really look at that differently, because the Egyptians are made out to be just
Yeah,
the slave holders, the bad guys there. So yeah, there's some real complexity in those stories as we look at them, today especially from a more globalized standpoint, I guess.
yeah. I think the note I want to end on that I had for myself was like toward the end of the book, Jade has a moment where she starts to think that she's just seeing all of the events that are going on um, as a slasher, so that she basically can like have purpose in a way. Like she's like it's a kind of a moment of self doubt where she's just seeing what she wants to see. Like she's questioning whether she's like what's actually happening is because of all of her like the knowledge she has, or if she's just seeing the events and putting them into like the story that she wants. And I feel like that's very powerful because like um the thing about her character the whole time was like that there was the trauma, and that was like there was her way of coping with stuff, and like she's got all of her issues, and like she's not really open to questioning why she does things the way she does, because like then that would make her think about what caused her to act that way and all that. She really avoids that. So she's having this moment of self-doubt at the end where she's like, am I just thinking like this because I need this to be this way? And I thought that was like a great moment for her because it's like an opportunity to change, and it's an opening of like her mind a little bit. And it's not long before that whole bear on the dam part. So like, yeah, there was just that really hit me this time around, that like after everything that she went through and she kind of got what she wanted, and she it didn't turn out the way that she thought it was going to, and obviously she had to confront things that she wasn't ready to, with like her father and stuff, and like saying like I wasn't for you, and fucking crazy shit like that. She
Yeah.
starts to think, have I just been needing this to be this way the whole time? And that's not really what was going on. And I thought that was a really powerful moment for like kind of her changing as a person, or growing, or maybe getting some kind of closure on some of that stuff.
She's so young to have that kind of thought. That's a very mature thought. In fact, going back to like religious traditions and people growing up within a religious tradition, a phrase that's been bandied about a lot these days, I know certainly within Christian communities, is the idea of deconstruction, deconstructing one's religious background, but essentially asking questions like, why do I believe the things I believe? My parents raised me going to church, or raised me going to the temple, raised me going to the mosque. I got here because this is part of a tradition passed down through many generations. But why do I still believe the things I believe? Maybe I need to reassess my beliefs. Like that deconstruction is, at least from my perspective, that's going on with people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s and later.
Yeah.
And here
Yep.
she's on the verge of 18, and she's thinking that kind of deconstruction of her narrative, her, in this case, a slasher narrative. That's a profound and mature step for her to take, especially knowing that like the slasher narrative, the slasher kind of cycle, and that structure that creates some kind of, as we mentioned earlier, some kind of control over the world, and belief that there is a control, that there is justice, that there is something some kind of permanence that she can count on. For her to be willing to question that when she's needed desperately something to hold on, that makes sense of what she's experienced, is a terribly mature and profound for someone of her age.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so. Jesse, any thoughts?
I think Greg said it brilliantly there. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know how to follow that up, so
yeah.
I'll just.
I talk so much. I'm sorry.
Oh no, not at all. Like that. No, that was great.
Yeah.
I mean, you nailed it. I'm like, all right.
Mic drop on that one then.
Mic drop. Yeah, totally.
Let's round out the discussion then by just kind of like, are there any final thoughts that you have about, because this is the first in a trilogy, and so we're kind of talking about an incomplete story by just focusing on this book, but like either do you have I'm gonna put it to you this way: either give us some finishing thoughts about the story, or maybe talk about like what the book's impact on you has been, whichever you think is more kind of appropriate for you.
Jesse, you want to start off?
Man, I'm kind of tongue-tied on this one, at least on this first book, or this first episode, since we're dealing with a trilogy. It's a lot of it really comes down to Jade being just a monumental hero. Overall, I mean, the things she endured and choosing to go down the path she did, she very could have easily gone down a different road. And I feel like she had every reason to go down that different road, but she didn't. She chose otherwise, and she really chose empathy and love and something good. And, you can't ignore the past, but she chose to not let it rule the entire rest of her life. And that's beyond Final Girl material right there to me.
I think about in the ancient times, the time surrounding Greek mythology, for example, the hero is the very strong, the very cunning, the one who leads the armies, etc. And then you get a story like this, and the hero is the least likely person, the person who doesn't even believe in herself, who doesn't think she can be the hero. It's such a very human and very, I guess, humanistic reversal of kind of the values and the virtues that we embraced a few thousand years ago. And also, this is the first book in a trilogy, and we will see Jade change and be able to reflect back on herself at this age when she's 17. She's going forward. She'll be a different person, and I think her ability to reflect on herself is one of the really cool things about the trilogy, and seeing how she transforms across all three stories. I mean, this is a heck of a character arc. She learns to believe in herself when very few people around her will believe in her. She learns to believe that she can be what she deeply desires to be, even though she doesn't think she looks like that person, doesn't perform or achieve like that person. She's got a big heart, and that heart is a chainsaw. It's not what most people would look for, and that's is why it's such a fresh and astonishing hero to have in your story. And she'll be able to reflect back on that as well. I think that's part of the most fascinating aspect of the trilogy.
Her heart is a chainsaw. Well said.
Thank you. Yes,
uh,
absolutely.
before I give a final thought, something occurred to me, and this just might be like, duh, Rob, we thought of this and like we didn't have to have a conversation about it, but like, Stacey Graves could Jade could have gone the route of Stacey Graves easily. B, she could identify with and be on Stacey's side because of like their kind of parallel experiences, but she still chooses to stop her. And I think that there's something to that. That like, why? Like there, like, you know what I'm saying? You could explore the motivation of like why, when you can see your experience played out almost like she even has this like moment where she, through Jade, we see the history of Stacey Graves from like the very beginning up to how it got to now in the lake. And like she doesn't even understand why she knows it, but she knows it. She so identifies with Stacey and still opposes her. I think that there's something to that, and I think that that was a really cool part of the whole thing too, because Jade's Jade, and like
Yeah.
um, I think that's what it comes down to. But as far as like my overall take on this book, it's fucking like, I don't know if he was trying to be ambitious. I don't know if he was trying to like just change the whole idea of slashers, but Jesus fucking Christ, man. And I've seen this with Jones in so many other examples where he takes an idea and he elevates it. Um,
Yes.
Not in like an elevated horror kind of way, which is like a dirty term and everything, but like he takes an idea. So I mentioned Zombie Bake Off over 2 hours ago now. He does stuff with zombies that no one had ever done before. And you could look at so many of his books and see examples of him taking the idea
Mongrels
of a
and
thing,
werewolves. Yes.
mongrels and werewolves,
Yes.
taking the idea of a thing and evolving it into something, I don't want to say better, but different, exciting, his own, whatever. Um, and like,
And these are well worn monsters, creatures, tropes, genres, etc., that people are very familiar with. Like
yeah,
people who aren't readers at all have seen the movies, we're very familiar with, and yet he pulls fresh material, reframes these things in ways that are very fresh. Mongrel's a great example. Let's take the werewolf mythos and reframe them from the back steps of a double wide trailer in Texas and the American South. I mean, it's
yeah,
brilliant, and he brings out details of the physiology of werewolves and how that transformation, that shifting happens, and why they're it's just wild. He is endlessly imaginative, I think when someday in the future he passes away, they need to take his brain and put it in a jar and study it, because it seems to work differently than most people's.
Well, and I'm going to tell you what I think it is, and I could be wrong, and I don't think maybe we could ever have an answer. Maybe he'll be like, "You nailed it." It's curiosity.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
he's not writing a book to write an awesome book. He's writing a fucking story because he's curious about what is this. He's trying to
yeah,
explore and understand something.
yeah,
There, and I feel like when you approach it from that perspective, you're not trying to impress people, or you're not trying to outdo people or one up people. All you're trying to do is have a new understanding. And I think that's kind of one of the keys to why he's so good at doing that kind of stuff, is
yeah.
because I interviewed him. I interviewed him on paper for Lisa My Scars, which I totally forgot that I even did, but like for Crime Spree magazine, and I have a copy laying around somewhere. And like there was a part where he was acknowledging, like, Greg, have you read it? Lisa My
Yes,
Scars.
it's the most disturbing book I have ever read. Yeah,
So he just acknowledges there's like in the book there's like a piece of like wallpaper that's curling up, and like the whole, like, one of the things that was really bugging him was like what's behind the paper, like that kind of thing. And like he was kind of acknowledging that like there was a fear and a curiosity that like really pushed him to like write. And um and I feel like that's kind of the key, one of the keys to why his stories end up doing what they do. All right, so we have been on the call for over 2.5 hours, and more than 2 hours is making it into the final episode. So we need to wrap up this deep dive. And I think that Greg's got a great way to take us out. It has nothing to do with the story, but it really has to do with Steven as a person and why he makes us cry so much. So once Greg reads this, we're done, and we hope you come back for our discussion about Don't Fear the Reaper. So take it away, Greg.
so everyone who's read his books knows his acknowledgements are themselves works of art, and they generally end with a thanks to his wife Nancy. And this one is, and I've read a lot of these dedications and acknowledgements, and they're powerful. But this one, he describes her watching all these scary movies with him so that he wouldn't watch them alone and be terrified by them. And he ends by saying, "Thank you, Nancy, for keeping me safe all those nights. I think the only time I haven't been wrong was when I said to you that maybe we could make a life together and grow old holding each other's hands. My heart is a chainsaw, yes, but you're the one who starts it."